everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I am joined today, really excited about an expert in a topic that is near and dear to our hearts here in the sales and marketing world. Jim Kraus is the founder of the Buyer Persona Institute. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Great to be here, David.
Yeah, really excited to dive in on this. This is a topic that comes up right at the beginning of every conversation, it seems, that we have in the B2B marketing and sales world, especially when it comes to the tech industry, but even beyond that. So, Jim, how did you get into this business? And then what are your definitions of the buyer persona?
Yeah, so actually the founder of Buyer Persona Institute was Adele Ravella. She founded the business about 15 years ago. I'm the president of Buyer Persona Institute now. Adele had retired a couple of years ago, and her and I have known each other for years. My background is heavily in marketing, market research, sales orientation, and a lot of what we do is kind of an intersection between all three of those things. Main passion and an area that I focus on, particularly in the B2B world, is how to best educate and influence prospective buyers so they get everything out of the buying decisions they're making. And you're obviously gaining a win by being able to influence them in a really positive and effective way to generate some more sales. So everything that we do is designed to take all the guesswork out of marketing and sales. And we'll talk more about that today, I'm sure. But that's one of the things I love about what we do is we're trying to take all the mystery out of what buyers really want, need, and try to make it very fact-based so that marketing and sales professionals that are interacting with these folks don't have to guess, right? And that's valuable for them, and it's also valuable for the prospective buyer, right? You're getting them information and experiences that they really want. So that's what we're all about.
Yeah, and people, it seems they, especially in the tech industry, they'll have a product that they developed. They have a hypothesis, that this is going to change the world and make everybody's life a lot better. And then a very, surface level understanding of the buyer and who is actually the target and who's going to be buying this. And then they just sort of go to market, with this surface level understanding. So in that case, how do you think about starting that journey to understand the buyer persona?
Yeah, no, I think if there's two or three key things that I think would be valuable to talk about today, Dave, one of them certainly is just defining what a buyer persona is. I think the other thing is about how do you go about developing buyer persona insights, and then how do you use them? And the first question you just asked is fundamental to that, right? Which is, what is a buyer persona? Now, when you say buyer persona, there's a lot of baggage associated with that term, good and bad, right? I mean, most people, when you hear buyer persona, associate it with a fictional avatar, if you will, of an individual or a role involved in the buying decision, right? So if it's a B2B tech solution, for example, you may think buyer persona and say, oh, we've got a CIO buyer persona and we have a finance director buyer persona. And these are kind of profiles of what does a typical CIO look like, for example, age, gender, top priorities, challenges, where do they source information, those kinds of things, right? And those buyer personas are okay, but they're a bit limiting, right? So I'd like to introduce you to another definition of buyer persona, which is instead of profiling an individual or a role, what you're really trying to understand is a very specific buying decision, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're a sales professional or a marketing professional, you're trying to influence buyers around a specific buying decision they're making, right? So when you think about a CIO, they may have, and I'm just using that as an example, they may have certain characteristics, but what really matters is if a CIO is, for example, in the market and his team's in the market for a new CRM solution, you want to understand things about that CRM buying decision, right? You want to know what are the wants, needs, challenges, questions they're going to ask around that CRM buying decision, because they're looking at multiple alternatives. It's a high consideration buy, right? They're educating themselves about what's out there in the market and trying to get informed as quickly and as effectively as they can. And you really want to understand that buying decision more so than you want to understand them as individuals. So that's a key distinction. And there's key elements within that maybe we can talk about that define next question is, what are the insights that define a buyer persona?
Okay. And I'm having flashbacks to being a sales rep, and you go to the sales kickoff at the beginning of the year, and the marketing team comes out and they go, "This is Mary Marketer. This is Bob, the
Right.
CEO." I know exactly what you're talking about, and you're kind of like, okay, it's helpful directionally, but
Right.
to your point, what's much more important is how do they actually go through a buying decision making process, and what
Correct.
does that look like? Not necessarily what college did they go to or something like that. Okay,
Correct.
so let's dive in. What do you specifically mean by that?
So let's use a CRM solution as an example, right? I'm just picking that arbitrarily. For those that are listening, whatever product, service, solution that you sell, kind of put yourself in the mindset of your prospective buyers, right?
Okay.
So let's just use CRM as an example, right? So what you ideally want to know about that CRM buying decision is you want to know for your prospective buyers, and what I mean by prospective buyers, I mean folks that have literally said, "Hey, we need to do something." We may not know exactly what we need to do, but whatever it is we're doing now is no longer working. It's not serving its purpose. We need something better, whatever that means, right? So now they're going out and they're looking, searching for alternatives. So what are the things you would want to know about a prospective buyer who had just said one day, woke up and said, "Hey, we really need to do something different. We need to look for something," right? I would argue there's five things that you want to know. And these are the five areas. We call them the five rings of buying insight, just a name. What's important is what they are. So the first one we call priority initiatives. These are triggers. These are literally what are the things that got this buyer, this organization, these people in these organization to actually say at this moment in time, we need to make a change. We need to start looking, right? So they may have had a challenge for years, right? What is the thing that's actually getting to say, "Hey, we got to go do something now"? So that's the first one. If you want to know what those are in advance. The second thing you want to know we call success factors. And these are outcomes or benefits. These are what are the top things if they make this investment in the CRM system, what are the things that they absolutely want to be able to achieve as a result of making that important investment? That's your second thing. So you've got your triggers and you've got your success factors, right? And now you know what those are for your prospective CRM buyers. That's pretty valuable. The third thing you want to know is perceived barriers. What perceived barriers are is trepidations or concerns that a buyer may have about making the investment with anybody, right? They're just, again, this is a significant investment. There's probably a lot that's on the line. They're moving away from the status quo. They don't want to mess things up. What are those trepidations? Also included in perceived barriers are there certain characteristics of providers that make buyers skittish, right? That may get them deselected at some point. Either, the buyer finds out something about a particular carrier and they say, let's probably don't want to consider them. Or maybe they do, and then they winnow them out. Regardless, perceived barriers are all the things that get in the way of your sales, right? Don't you want to know what those are in advance, right? So you can proactively be ready for them. The fourth one is decision criteria. Decision criteria is really when buyers are starting to get a bit educated about the solution. So let's say the CRM solution, right? So maybe they're into their buying journey. They've looked at some websites, done some research, talked to their network, talked to some providers even. They're starting to really get more narrowed in on, okay, this is really what we want. And these are the key questions that we're going to actually make a decision on and evaluate the different alternatives we're looking at. Again, wouldn't it be great if you knew what those questions were ahead of time? And then the fifth and final part of your buyer persona to round it out is buyer's journey. And the buyer's journey has three components. It has what are the steps in the process? So what does a typical buying journey look like for an organization looking for a CRM solution? Who are the people involved in that decision? Who are the key influencers and the final decision maker? And what are all the information sources that they use and trust to make that decision? Right. So now if you have those five things about a CRM buying decision, what's triggering the need, what outcomes they want, what are all their hangups and concerns that they're going to have, all the questions they're going to ask you when they're evaluating you either directly or indirectly, and all the steps they're going to take in the process and who's going to be involved. That is a fundamentally different buyer persona than profiling a CIO, for example. I mean, that's something you can really start to go to work on from a marketing and sales perspective.
Yeah, and I like the five rings because it's very easy to kind of understand, and maybe even if you have like a PDF or something like that that people could could print out and look at, that would be super helpful. And what I'm thinking is you could take, if you have a really good understanding of the various five rings, you could take that, and that's essentially your marketing plan
It,
for going out. You've got the how do they find out? What questions are they going to ask? What's their buying process? You've got your marketing plan kind of built around the persona.
yeah, it's literally a lot of people, companies that we work with, they call it their cheat sheet because that's what it is. You talk to recent buyers because the next question is obviously how you build a buyer persona. We can talk about that, but the key thing is the way you do it is that these insights are fact-based. You're not guessing. You're going out and getting these insights in a really highly credible, authentic way, and it is your cheat sheet. And if you think about from a marketing perspective, whether it's thought leadership, messaging, campaign ideation, et cetera, has all kinds of implications for that. And on the sales perspective, you can use these insights across all your sales cadences, right? Like when you're first talking to prospects on the phone for inbound calls, when you're trying to work them through the buying process, there's all kinds of opportunities to use these insights to really high effect.
You could dig in. And you brought up a really good point. So, and people say this over and over, go talk to your customers.
Right.
Talk to your customers, find out what even beyond marketing, building your product initially, talk to your customers. So what's the process of getting to know your buyer persona and starting to get this information from them?
Yeah, so the way to do it is to go talk to recent buyers. That is, those they are the expert. There is no other expert except recent buyers. And what I mean by recent buyers, which is really important, is it's not necessarily your current customers. It's okay to talk to your current customers. I'd never discourage that. You can learn a ton from your own customers. But if you really want to go, do this, I want to say the right way, but the best way is go talk to buyers that have made the exact same buying decision that you're trying to influence. So let's just use CRM as an example, just to kind of run this thread through. What you would want to do to develop a CRM buyer persona is talk to people that were involved in a CRM buying decision in the last 3 to 6 months. Maybe you were in the consideration set, maybe you won or lost a deal, maybe you weren't even in a consideration set at all. It really doesn't matter. What matters is you're going to talk to people that have literally gone through that entire buying journey, right? And now when you go talk to them, the way to do it is to do what we call in-depth interviews. And these are typically 30, 40-minute interviews with buyers. And the key thing is it's not a survey. You're not asking them to rate and rank things. All you're trying to do is understand their full buying story from the moment they had that initial trigger until the time they made a final decision and all the points in between. So when we get on the phone with a recent buyer, we only ask one scripted question. Literally, the first question we ask them is, take me back to the day when you first decided you needed a CRM solution, as an example,
Mhm.
and tell me what happened. And from there, we're just questioning, prompting, and probing to understand. We'll ask things like, oh, what was the thing that really sparked your, are you even going to start looking in the first place? Oh, tell me more about that, right? Well, what were some of the key outcomes that you needed? What were the things that you need to be able to point to say that you achieved because of it? Can you tell me about how many providers that you looked at? Okay, well, how did you first figure out who you were going to even look at, right? Tell me a little bit about how you got that information, how you made that list. Well, did you shortlist it? Did you winnow down your options? Great. Tell me a little bit about how that happened. How did you go from 8 to 5? The 3 that were weeded out, what happened as far as why were you not considering them at a certain point? And you just go like that. You just literally, what you're trying to understand is by the time you get to the end of your conversation, if you understand everything that happened, you can fill out those 5 rings I told you absolutely perfectly. And the thing I'll say about interviewing recent buyers, a lot of people have trepidation about going talk to recent buyers, or even if it's their current customers. And I will tell you, we've done thousands of these. They love talking about this stuff, right? Because you're talking to them about something they care a heck of a lot about because this is a really meaningful decision they made. And the thing they love about it is they're not guessing, right? They're actually telling you what happened, right? There's no guesswork here. They're literally telling you what was important, and they really get into it. We usually schedule our interviews for 30 minutes, and a lot of times we can easily go 40, and they'll give us the time because, again, they're interested in it. They want to give you their point of view. So that's the way to do it. And what you want to do is you do a series of those interviews, and then you analyze those interviews to try to find patterns in the data that you get back, and you develop your insights for each one of them based on those patterns. That's how you do it. And the beauty of talking to recent buyers is it's so authentic, right? So when you deliver your buyer persona to your organization, it rings true, right? I mean, you know immediately that these are recent real buyers you're talking to. The other thing is you want to include a lot of buyer quotes in your persona. So if you have, like, let's say I identify a success factor, right? You want to support it with a lot of buyer quotes from your interviews because, again, that lends a lot of credibility to your insights. The other thing does is it really lets you walk in the shoes of your buyer, right? Because the buyer is the star of the show here, right? Those are the people you're really trying to influence. You want to understand them as deeply and as empathetically as you can. And going to talk to them is really the only way to do that.
And why do you think people are trepidatious about, having these conversations with their buyer? And is it the awkwardness of reaching out and asking for the time, or what's holding people back?
I think it's a combination of things. I think the first that what you just mentioned, David, is right on. I think there are concerns or trepidations about, oh, well, they really want to talk to me. These are buyers, these are customers. They're normal people making buying decisions like you are. I mean, put yourselves in their shoes. Let's say you yourself, anybody listening to this, was involved in a purchase decision. If somebody contacted you and said, "Hey, we really like to learn a little bit more about your buying decision and what was important to you," you're not going to take offense to that. I mean, that's a very normal thing that happens thousands of times a day, in the world in market research and other disciplines. So I would say don't be nervous about it because buyers love talking about it. The other I think people get trepidation about it, like, what do you ask? What do you say? The nice thing about the five rings is we have a master class on how to do this. We have a second edition of our book, Buyer Personas, coming out in the summer that we have whole chapters written on actually how to do these interviews. And anybody interested in doing this themselves, you should tap into those resources, absolutely. But just for now, what I will say is if you have those five areas in mind, right, just jot them down on a little piece of paper. I guarantee you, if those are the things you're trying to learn, even if you don't learn any type of way to how to do it formally, you'll end up having a very rich discussion and you will end up getting the insights you want because you're going to start asking those kinds of questions. And they're really just natural questions that any buyer would expect to get, right? Because all those five things I mentioned to you are a big part of it, right? So,
It's so interesting because now that I think about it, I buy stuff all the time, and I don't think anybody's ever reached out and said, "Can I grab 30 minutes to ask you about this?" It's
mhm.
interesting, and such a great opportunity to literally be able to fill out the five rings. Is there a certain number of these interviews that you should have, or is it just sort of an ongoing fact-finding mission?
Yeah, so typically what we recommend to do is to do at least 10 interviews. Anything less than that, what happens is it can turn into something that's a little anecdotal, right? So you may hear something from one buyer, and if you do fewer than 10, maybe it's an insight, maybe it's not, because you only heard from one buyer. Once we do 10, we've done so many of these that once you do 10, after 10, we usually start hearing recurring themes. We start hearing similar things over again. So there's no reason not to do more than 10. I mean, do as many as you like, right? The more the merrier type of thing, right? You're always going to learn something in every conversation you have. I guarantee you that. But 10 is a really good number to have a solid foundation that you can rely on. And if anybody in your organization, some organizations are real sticklers, they want to say, hey, we need to talk to hundreds of people. That's fine. You could always do a survey research later if you wanted to. But I guarantee you, if you do at least 10 interviews, maybe 12 to 16, if you're looking at a couple of segments in the market, you're going to learn a ton that you can really start using right away.
That's really interesting. And with your firm, so you have an education component where people can learn to do this,
Mhm.
and then also you actually do this for clients, or is that a part of your service?
Yeah, so yes, that's a core part of our service. So we offer a master class, which is a self-paced online course. We offer on our website, which is buyerpersona.com, pretty easy to remember. And we also have, like I had mentioned, we have a second edition of Buyer Personas book that's coming out in the summer. The first edition's out there right now, that a lot of marketers and sellers really enjoy. And that's really we wrote the book as a how to do this. So that's one thing you can do. And then we work with a lot of companies and we do these studies for them because it can be a lift, right? Because you have to find these recent buyers. There's a way to go about finding the right people to talk to. There's a way to do these interviews and how to analyze the data. And I would say none of it can't be learned, but it does take some resources to figure out how do you do all those things and do them well. So that's another thing we do quite a bit of, is we work with companies to develop buyer personas, regardless of what their solution is. We work in all types of industries.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think of I can fix my car kind of, or my I used to be able to. Now
Right, right,
they're too high tech. I don't even try. But I used to kind of be able to, and then I realized at some point I should just pay an expert,
right.
to do this because I'm either going to mess it up or it's going to take a really long time. And but I think with the tools that people are learning in this podcast, they can kind of do it yourself for a while, but then if you're a bigger company or you just have more money than time, then they should call you.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, right, is the, worth the investment type of thing, right? So,
Yeah.
the nice thing about these are, if you do a thoughtful buyer persona, this is an investment that you can use for several years, right? Unless you're in a market that is changing drastically and very quickly, or there's all kinds of new competition coming in at a very rapid rate. You can, if you did like a CRM buyer persona, that's going to last you for a couple of years for sure, right? And you are literally, it's going to inform just about every marketing and sales decision you make. I assure you of that. So it's a good investment to make, but it is, it's a decision, right? Or again, there are tools that we make available to for do-it-yourselfers as well.
It's a project. And it's interesting that you say 10 people will give you enough of a feeling so that you're kind of directionally correct. Because I'm just thinking back, we relaunched the 10 Bound website to have a directory of technology companies specific to sales technology. And I went out, as part of the project was I wanted to talk to as many sales technology buyers as I could find. And I ended up doing 50 calls. And
Mhm.
I could have just done 10, because now that I think about it, yeah, after about 10, 15 calls, you start to realize most people have about the same process in
Right.
buying sales technology, and I really didn't need to do all 50, but hey, bigger sample set, right?
Yeah, and again, you're always going to learn something, and we do advocate doing more if you're doing a segmented study. And all I mean by segmented study is, a great example would be, there's a company that's selling a particular solution, and there's a IT and a line of business buyer, right? I'm just as an example, and they say, you know what? I know we're focused on the buying decision. We're getting insights about the buying decision. We're not trying to profile IT or line of business buyers. But I really think that there's going to be there's differences, and maybe what are some of the things that more or less than important to them. Then I would say do more. We typically would recommend doing 6 to 8 interviews per segment if you want to make sure that you have a buyer persona where you can identify where are all the things that are common for IT and LOB, again, as an example, and are there differences, right? And if you do 6 to 8 in each segment, 12 to 16 total, then you'll have enough data to be able to do that, right? So that when we do a buyer persona like that, if we have 35 buying insights total in our buyer persona, and we may have 20 to 25 that are the same for both segments or both roles, and maybe another 5 to 10 that are different. And we're able to call those out so that you can see what's unique. So that's the one example where I would say definitely consider doing a few more.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I'm just thinking, bringing it back to sales technology, there's the senior leader who just would sort of ratify a purchase. There's the, kind of the champion in who's checking out all these different sales technologies, and they winnowed it down to 3 or 4. And then there's the individual contributors, which are the salespeople or the
Mhm.
SDRs who use the sales technology. And
Right.
they can even plug in a free tool and then bring it up to the boss to try to get funding for it. So
Yep.
it's very nuanced, and each one has its own journey, if you will.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, one of the things we definitely recommend about who you talk to with recent buyers, there's two key things, criteria that two boxes that anybody we talk to for a study you want to check. One is that their organization, again, on a B2B world, their organization was involved in a buying decision for that particular solution in the last 3 to 6 months. After 6 months, it gets a little dicey. People start to forget things or people move on, et cetera. 3 to 6 months is a good window. So that's number one. And then the second is whoever you interview, you want to make sure that they were significantly involved in the buying decision. And what I mean by significantly involved is they don't have to be the final decision maker. And in fact, most of our best interviews aren't the final decision makers. What we want is I'll call it technical buyers. Doesn't mean they're just evaluating the technology, but they're the ones that were involved in figuring out who we were going to consider or involved in the evaluation. And they sat in on demos and et cetera, because we want to interview people that can tell us everything that happened in the buyer's journey and all the things that were important for their organization. They're not just speaking for themselves. They're speaking for the totality of that entire evaluation in that buyer's journey. They're almost the voice box for that purchase decision. So that's why we're pretty strict about who we talk to and make sure that they're only passively involved in the decision, or they're just, kind of ratifying the decision at the end. We don't learn as much as we really need to, right? If you think about those 5 areas that we talked about, you just don't get enough detail. So we try to get to those technical buyers and talk to them because they know what we want to find out, essentially.
It's a treasure trove of information. That makes perfect sense. And then so okay, last question for you. Say you're the salesperson or the SDR, you're sitting at the sales kickoff, and the marketing team comes out and they've got Mary marketer and Bob the CIO, the old way of doing things.
Right.
What can the consumer of this information do? Do they go and have a conversation with the marketing team?
Yeah.
I know that that's wrought with difficulty because, marketing's the only job where everybody in the company is an expert and
Right.
they're coming to give you advice. So what should that salesperson do? Can they do their own research?
It depends on the organization. I think it depends on the organization, the relationship that you have, right? I mean, if it's kind of a high trust type relationship or whatever, the best thing to do would be to go talk to if the marketer is the one that are presenting this kind of profile, individual role profile type thing. I would have a conversation with them and, tell them, bring up the 5 rings or however you want to call it, right? And say, hey, look, this is the kind of information we're really looking to understand, because if we have these 5 areas of insight, here's the things we can really do with it. I think one of the challenges marketing has sometimes is there's a disconnect. They're not sure what is it that sales really needs, right? Well, sales needs to tell marketing what it really needs. So we've used the 5 rings before. I know a lot of companies we work with use the 5 rings to have those kinds of discussions, right? Where, they go in there and they say, hey, this is at the end of the day, what we're really trying to affect. Yes, it's people, but we're trying to affect a buying decision. If you're just giving me profile information on a role, that's not helping really. It's not, it's providing maybe some guidance. I maybe know a little bit more, but for example, I could profile a CIO, but I can tell you right now, if it's a network infrastructure buying decision and a email software as a service application, those are 2 entirely different animals. And I can assure you the CIO is going to care about very, very different things, right? So to profile the CIO is not very helpful. You want to know how the CIO, whoever's involved, thinks about all those specific aspects of that decision. So I would use it to have a conversation with them and see what they say, see if there's, whether it's this type of buyer persona or something else. But just getting insights around the buying decision is really the key, right? You just, that's going to be a vast improvement over profiling, individuals and roles.
Big time. And it's interesting because a good framework really can bring people together, even if they're not on the same page. Or obviously sales is from Venus and marketing's from Jupiter or whatever that whole thing is. But if you have a good framework, then it's like, hey, it's almost like a neutral, party in between.
Exactly.
And when the book, the revised book comes out, is that part of the book? Can they see the framework in there?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We talk about in the book, we spend quite a bit of time in the beginning of the book talking about the importance of understanding the buying decision, because it's really rethinking buyer personas, right? I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. There's a lot of companies that use this methodology and this framework, but there's a lot that don't and haven't heard about it. So we spent a lot of time in the beginning of the book just trying to, basically juxtapose 2 things, right? What we've been talking about, the individual profile of a buyer or an individual versus the buying decision. And it becomes pretty obvious in the book. We take some pains to explain why it's so important. And then the rest of the book is really a how-to, right? And the five rings and the five rings and the buyer is the star of the show, right? The five rings is the framework, but it's understanding the buyer and the buying decision they're making and the context of that is what's really important. So we spend the rest of the book explaining exactly how to do it and everything we're talking about in a lot more detail, of course.
Okay. So you can do it yourself, folks. Get the book or just call Jim and he can do it. He can help you guide through it because sometimes, especially in the early stage, it's like, hey, we don't know who the buyer journey is, or I mean the buyer persona. We've got this great product. We have a hypothesis. We think that we should go to market like this, but we're really not sure. And this can offer a lot of clarity but and then also obviously if you've been at it for a few years and you do have product market fit, then this is like rocket fuel. Yeah.
Yep. And I will say the buyer personas we do, the good news is we've never had a time where we've done a buyer persona and helped an organization where they've seen the insights that come out of the buyer persona and said, hey, we didn't know any of this stuff. If that's the case, then you probably wouldn't be selling anything. So you are going to see some insights that are really confirming. And that's valuable in itself, right? It's kind of like straightens your back and says, hey, we're on the right trail here, right? Like maybe it's like we double down on this, or we're understanding this in a maybe more nuanced way than we did before. But then there's also new insights, right? That you maybe weren't on your radar, or you didn't realize that organizations that are buying or looking at this as hard as they are, right? And you need to up your game a little bit or strategize. How do you face off against this requirement you really didn't know is as important? Whenever we do a buyer persona, I usually find both, and both are just as valuable. Confirming is not bad. It's not a waste of time. It's actually, the nice thing is it creates even more buy-in for the findings because you're like, okay, yeah, we're on the right trail. These are who we're trying to sell to, but now we have more depth to allow us to do it even better. So,
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And it's funny because probably some people listening have said, I've been saying this for years and nobody listens to me. But when Jim comes in, it's like, oh, he's a genius, And that's the beauty of getting outside help because you could be saying the same thing for years, but then when, a breath of fresh air comes in, then it's like, oh, great. Okay, this is how we go forward.
the most satisfying thing I think we do is when we do readouts of the personas.
Hmm.
I love it when we have marketing and sales and product folks all part of that presentation, if you will,
Yeah.
because it brings everybody together like nothing else. Because it's not me. What the star of the show is the buyer, and it comes out so quickly with all the buyer quotes and everything. And what happens is it brings everybody together because you can't refute it. You went out and talked to the authoritative source, the people that have literally just made this buying decision, right? And you talk to several of them, right? And you really analyze the data and you put some critical thinking behind it. Now it's something you can really rally around rather than, hey, that feature that the product folks have been pushing, not so important. You know what I mean? Or maybe there's one that they have been pushing and people have been paying attention and maybe they should be, right? Or sales has a particular point of view. But the important thing is that it aligns and brings everybody together. And as we know, that's pretty valuable. That's kind of one of those doesn't show up in the box score kind of benefits of buyer personas, but it's pretty meaningful.
Yeah, it's a North Star. The North Star
Yeah,
is the customer because they're the one paying our bills and doing. If we
got
don't
it.
have the customer, then what are we doing? So
Absolutely.
it rallies everybody. Well, Jim, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And we'll put some links in the show notes if people want to get the book and get in touch with you. And I assume that you're on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I would say if anybody wants to get in touch, LinkedIn, Jim Kraus is a great place. We're always trying to put stuff out there as much as we can, like everybody is on LinkedIn and buyerpersona.com. We've got a lot of resources there as well. We've got templates and things like that, other information if you want to dig into this. And yeah, and the book's going to be out, I think, in end of July. So buyer personas, look for it. And yeah, this is, this is what we love talking about and love doing. So
This is great. I'm going to go and check out those resources myself right after this. And thank you so much. I'm glad we got connected and thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
thanks so much, David. I really appreciate it.